now face another traumatizing task.
I felt that the rest of the family would be better off if they remembered Rosie and Carlos for what they were. And so I went on my own to do the body identification.
But every single individual must be identified, recorded, and mourned. Every clue to their identity takes on vital significance. Wedding rings, ID cards, dental records. The most poignant, heartbreaking remnants of a person and a life cut short.
We recognize Anna through her jewelry and clothes. And Robin, he's an exceptional Caucasian guy. He's really tall, and he was the only one that was found 6'3", 6'4", you know.
Then the funerals.
Definitely very difficult for the parent, especially in our Asian tradition. The child sends the parent to the hills to be buried. The parent do not send the child to be buried.
Horrible, horrible week. Just unbelievably awful. And the only way I think you sort of coped is by having family and friends around you. I think that would be about the worst week of my life. Ever.
I was going to funeral after funeral after funeral that whole week. One of them was my very first ballet teacher, and I remember feeling terrible at her funeral because I saw her son and daughter, and I couldn't even speak to them because I didn't know what to say. I mean, when you lose a family member, nothing you say is going to make them feel better.
Nisa Barno lost 3 members of her family, Anna, Robin, and Adam. As she struggles to come to terms with her loss, she begins to ask questions. Lots of questions.
I want an answer, you know. I want to know how did this happen? How can this happen? How does a building literally topple down? There was stories going around that the dragon beneath started to move. Yeah, right. We wanted answers, and we wanted to hold somebody accountable for this. They took away people that we loved.
Many other relatives of the dead, as well as survivors, want answers too. Why had Highland Towers Block 1 collapsed? And who was at fault? December the 11th, 1993. In Kuala Lumpur, Highland Towers Block 1 collapses, killing 48 people. Now, all Malaysia wants to know why the disaster happened and who is responsible. The government immediately launches an inquiry to find out. The council calls scores of witnesses and excavates the foundations of the collapsed tower. Although the investigators find evidence that the construction engineers cut corners, this alone does not explain the way the tower collapsed.
If you had some structural default in a building, you would expect the building to collapse vertically rather than toppling forward. There must be an external force that came into play.
Suspicion focuses on the steep hillside behind Highland Towers. Was this external force generated here? Mike Rickard, who took part in the rescue operation, suspects that this slope played a critical part in the disaster. He begins his own investigation of the suspect area and takes photographs.
There must have been 20, 24 different retaining walls as you go up the hill. Some very deep, some relatively shallow, some short, some long.
It is clear to Mike that these walls had been poorly constructed, and engineer Dr. Asbi agrees.
The engineering design behind the rubber wall was really questionable.
Just prior to the fall of Block 1, eyewitness Bruce Mitchell clearly saw these retaining walls disintegrating. But why had the walls collapsed, and how was this linked to the catastrophic failure of the tower? The answer is all about water. Above Highland Towers is a small stream that has been diverted into a system of drains and pipes. the early 1990s, a new development in Bukit Antara Bangsa begins on the other side of the ridge. Vast areas of land are cleared and deforested, and water runoff is diverted into the same system of drains and pipes above Highland Towers. These drains and pipes soon become stressed by the increased flow of water and silt.
Very quickly the pipe was blocked. So the pipe was overflowing and burst in a number of places. And unfortunately, we were getting water feeding into the hillside, right across the back of what we know as Highland Towers.
This relentless soaking is worst behind Block 1. Then, in December 1993, the annual monsoon dumps yet more water on the already heavily saturated slope. On Saturday the 11th, the water pressure behind the slope reaches a critical threshold. Directly behind Block 1, a huge volume of wet mud bursts forwards and downwards, smashing through the retaining walls. Seconds later, 100,000 cubic meters of mud, approximately the weight of 200 747 jumbo jets, rams into the foundations of Block 1. To begin with, the landslide shoves the entire mass of the building forwards. But this lateral sideways pressure is so powerful that the foundations at the front snap, and Block 1 crashes down.
You try and play with nature and it'll bite back. You've taken away the ability to absorb the water up on the hillside. But my water's still got to go somewhere. And it went into the earth, and the earth said, I can only take so much water. And after which I've got to move. And so it moved. And it took Highland Towers with it. So yes, don't mess with nature.
But who had messed with nature? Who was to blame for the disaster? In 1994, the residents of Highland Towers launched legal actions against developers, builders, and the local council. It takes years of bitter legal argument, but the residents eventually win their case more than a decade later. They receive some compensation. But the local council appeals and wins. For the residents, the court's decision is a travesty of justice.
As an individual, I'm responsible for the mistakes I make. Therefore, why should not a corporation or a local authority also be held liable if they make mistakes? But in this particular case, the law works in their favor.
No one should be immune to one's wrongdoings, right? There must be some kind of liability if it's really truly their fault. Otherwise, complacency sets in. What about the future development? If local authority is immune to this, they would not want to try hard enough trying to actually enforce certain things that is within their power to ensure that this thing does not recur.
In the aftermath of Highland Towers, the Malaysian government makes a number of important reforms. They focus on the way authorities respond to disasters to ensure that there will be no confusion of responsibility.
Definitely we have learned, but we must continue to learn. Out from this, the government realized and came in with Arahan 20, or what you call the 20 directive under the Prime Minister Department, where the instrument is laid out of who, where, how is responsible when there is a disaster on land.
Malaysia now has its own disaster response team, the Special Malaysia Disaster Assistance and Rescue Team, or the SMART team.
The SMART team is formulated and formed in line similar to a DART team or the Japanese team, whereby they combine the fire service, the police and others and combine them together to form a strike team, an international strike team.
To Today, nearly 20 years after the Highland Towers disaster, local authorities must rigorously scrutinize planning applications. And there's now a special unit that monitors the safety of slopes.
Kita belajar dari Highland Tower bahawa lereng-lereng bukit adalah satu kawasan yang agak sensitif dan jika ia tidak dipantau, ia akan membahayakan.
Kuala Lumpur is vibrant and ever-expanding. New developments need space and often find it on the hills that surround the city. This means that lessons learned after the Highland Towers disaster must never be forgotten.
Those who do not read history will live through it again. And I think we'll live through it again if we forget.
I don't want anyone else to go through what me and my family or any of my neighbors went through that day.
To me, there still needs a lot of work to be done to make sure there's no more Highland Towers.
For the survivors and those who lost family members and friends, nothing will ever make up for the lives lost that day in December.
I miss my sister a lot. I don't have a sister. She was the only one. And she had a baby, and so did I. Same year. There was only a 2-month difference between our boys. I just miss that what could have been.
Thank you.